The night Isabella Sterling disappeared, the entire city of Manhattan held its breath. Sirens echoed through the rain-soaked streets as police cars surrounded the towering glass mansion of the Sterling family. Helicopters hovered above like restless vultures, their searchlights cutting through the darkness. Inside the mansion, chaos had replaced the usual silence of wealth. "Find my daughter!" Alexander Sterling shouted, his voice cracking through the grand hall. Alexander Sterling was not just rich. He was one of the most powerful billionaires in the world. Banks feared him. Politicians respected him. Corporations competed for his attention. But in that moment, he was just a father whose 6-year-old daughter had vanished without a trace. Little Isabella Sterling had disappeared from her bedroom sometime between midnight and dawn. No broken windows. No ransom note. No witnesses. Only an empty bed and a pink blanket lying on the floor. Detectives searched every corner of the mansion. The security cameras had mysteriously gone black for exactly 17 minutes. 17 minutes. That was all it took for someone to steal the most valuable child in America. For weeks, the media exploded with headlines. Billionaire's daughter kidnapped. Where is Isabella Sterling? Search teams combed forests, lakes, abandoned buildings, and every possible hideout. Millions of dollars in rewards were offered. But Isabella Sterling was never found. Eventually, the case turned cold. The world moved on. But Alexander Sterling never did. 15 years later, the Sterling mansion had changed. It was quieter now. Colder. Alexander Sterling had aged far more than 15 years. His once black hair had turned gray. The powerful billionaire who once dominated business magazines now avoided interviews and public events. But one thing never changed. Every year on Isabella's birthday, he hosted a charity gala for missing children. Hope was a strange thing. It refused to die. Even after 15 years. Meanwhile, across the city, in a small apartment far from the wealthy districts, a young woman named Emily Carter woke before sunrise. She tied her dark hair into a loose bun and slipped into a plain uniform. Emily worked as a maid. Her life was simple, quiet, and mostly unnoticed. No one would ever guess that fate was about to drag her into the biggest mystery the city had ever seen. Emily worked for a cleaning agency that sent workers to wealthy homes. One morning, her supervisor handed her a new assignment. The Sterling mansion, the woman said. Emily blinked. The billionaire's house? Yes. Their regular staff is short for a few weeks. Emily hesitated. Everyone knew the story of the missing daughter. Some people said the mansion was haunted by grief. But Emily needed the job. So she accepted. She had no idea that walking through those gates would change her life forever. The mansion. The Sterling estate was larger than Emily had imagined. Tall iron gates opened slowly as she arrived. The driveway curved through perfectly trimmed gardens before revealing a massive glass mansion overlooking the river. Emily swallowed nervously. Inside, the house manager greeted her with a clipboard. You'll handle the east wing, the woman said. Be quiet. Mr. Sterling values privacy. Emily nodded. She began cleaning rooms one by one. Everything in the mansion felt expensive, polished, and strangely empty. As if the house itself had stopped living. Then she reached a hallway filled with photographs. Pictures of a smiling little girl. Blonde hair. Bright eyes. Isabella Sterling. Emily stared at one photo longer than the others. Something about the girl felt oddly familiar. But she couldn't explain why. The accident. Later that afternoon, Emily carried a tray of tea toward Alexander Sterling's private study. Her hands trembled slightly. She had never served someone this powerful before. As she pushed the door open, she slipped. The tray tilted. The teacup shattered against the marble floor. Hot tea splashed everywhere. "Oh, I'm so sorry," Emily gasped. Alexander Sterling looked up from his desk. For a moment, he seemed ready to explode with anger. Then he noticed something. Emily had fallen to the floor, clutching her wrist. Her sleeve had slid back slightly. And on her skin, just above her wrist, was a small, crescent-shaped birthmark. Alexander Sterling froze. His heart slammed against his ribs. Because 15 years ago, his daughter had the exact same birthmark. In the exact same place. The room went silent. Emily looked up nervously. "I'm really sorry, sir," she said softly. But Alexander Sterling wasn't listening anymore. His mind had only one terrifying question. Could it be possible that the maid standing in front of him was actually his missing daughter? And if she was, who had stolen her 15 years ago? Alexander Sterling couldn't take his eyes off the mark on Emily's wrist. A small crescent. Exactly like Isabella's. His chest tightened. For 15 years, he had forced himself to believe his daughter was gone. Police had searched the world. Private investigators had followed thousands of leads. Nothing. Not a single trace. And now, a maid stood in front of him with the same birthmark. It had to be a coincidence. It had to be. But something deep inside him whispered otherwise. Emily quickly pulled her sleeve down, embarrassed. "I'm really sorry, sir," she repeated nervously. "I'll clean the floor right away." Alexander said nothing for a moment. Then he spoke slowly. "What is your name?" "Emily Carter." "How long have you worked for the agency?" "About 2 years." She avoided eye contact, clearly uncomfortable. Alexander studied her face carefully. Dark hair. Brown eyes. Nothing like the blonde, blue-eyed child he remembered. But people change. Children grow. And sometimes, appearances can lie. He forced himself to remain calm. "You may go," he said quietly. Emily nodded gratefully and hurried out of the room. But Alexander didn't move. His heart was racing. Within seconds he pressed the intercom on his desk. "Mr. Hayes," he said. A voice responded immediately. "Yes, sir. Come to my office. The investigation begins." 5 minutes later, Robert Hayes entered the study. Robert had worked for Alexander for nearly 20 years. He was more than a security chief. He was the man Alexander trusted with everything. "What's wrong?" Robert asked. Alexander leaned back in his chair. "There's a maid here today," he said. Robert frowned slightly. "That doesn't sound like an emergency." Alexander slid a photograph across the desk. It was a picture of Isabella at age 6. Robert had seen it many times. Alexander pointed to the child's wrist. "The birthmark." Robert nodded. "I remember." Alexander's voice dropped to a whisper. "The maid has the same one." Robert went completely still. "You're sure?" "I saw it clearly." Silence filled the room. Robert finally spoke. "That could be coincidence." Yes, Alexander replied. But after 15 years. I'm not ignoring it. He stood and walked toward the window overlooking the river. I want everything on her, he said quietly. Background, family, childhood, medical records. Robert hesitated. And if she finds out? She won't, Alexander replied coldly. Emily's life. Meanwhile, Emily continued cleaning the East Wing. She had no idea that her life was being investigated. To her, this was just another job. Another mansion. Another wealthy employer. But something about this house made her uneasy. Maybe it was the silence. Maybe it was the photographs of the missing girl. Or maybe it was the strange way Alexander Sterling had stared at her. She finished dusting a bookshelf and glanced at one of the framed pictures again. Little Isabella was laughing in the photo. The resemblance hit Emily again. Not the hair. Not the eyes. But something else. The shape of the face. The smile. Emily quickly shook the thought away. That's ridiculous, she muttered. She had grown up in foster homes. Her parents were unknown. No wealthy family had ever come looking for her. Her life had always been ordinary. Hard. Lonely. Nothing like the life of a billionaire's daughter. The file. That night, Robert Hayes returned to Alexander's office with a thin folder. I worked fast, he said. Alexander took the file immediately. Inside were the first results of the investigation. Name, Emily Carter. Age, 21. Occupation, housekeeping staff. Alexander's eyes narrowed. Isabella would have been 21. Keep reading, Robert said. Alexander flipped the page. The next line made his stomach twist. Birth records, unknown. Parents, unknown. Childhood history, entered foster care at age 6. Alexander slowly looked up. 6, he whispered. Robert nodded grimly. Yes. Alexander's hands began to tremble. Isabella disappeared at 6. Robert spoke carefully. This could still be coincidence. But even he didn't sound convinced. Alexander stared at the photograph of Emily clipped to the file. Something inside him was waking up. Something dangerous. Hope. After 15 years of grief. Hope was the most terrifying thing of all. The next step. What do we do? Robert asked. Alexander closed the file. We don't tell her anything yet. Why not? Because if I'm wrong, Alexander said quietly, I won't destroy her life for nothing. He paused. Then he added one sentence. But if I'm right. His voice hardened. Someone stole my daughter. And I will find out who. Robert understood immediately. There's one way to know for sure. Alexander nodded. Yes. A DNA test. But neither of them realized something terrifying. Someone else in the mansion had already noticed Emily. And that person knew a secret. A secret buried for 15 years. If the truth came out, everything would collapse. The Sterling mansion was quiet that evening. But behind its polished walls, something dangerous had begun to move. Alexander Sterling sat in his office, staring at the file about Emily Carter. The thin stack of papers felt heavier than anything he had held in years. 6 years old. Unknown parents. Foster care. The same age Isabella had been when she disappeared. And that birthmark. Alexander pressed his fingers against his temple. His mind refused to stay calm. "Get the DNA sample," he finally said. Robert Hayes nodded. "I'll handle it quietly." "No mistakes," Alexander replied. "If this leaks to the press, the entire world will explode." Robert understood. If the media discovered that the billionaire believed his missing daughter might be working in his own mansion as a maid, the story would become global news within hours. "Leave it to me," Robert said before leaving the office. Alexander was alone again. But for the first time in 15 years, he felt something he had buried long ago. Hope. Meanwhile, in the kitchen, Emily had finished most of her work for the day. The kitchen staff had already left, and she was washing the last few dishes. She hummed quietly to herself. Her life had always been simple. She worked hard, saved money, and dreamed of maybe someday going to college. But big dreams had never belonged to her. Suddenly, the door opened. Emily turned. A tall woman stepped inside. Elegant. Perfectly dressed. Her cold gray eyes scanned the room. Emily immediately recognized her. Victoria Sterling. Alexander Sterling's wife. Emily quickly lowered her head. "Good evening, ma'am." Victoria didn't answer right away. She studied Emily carefully. Every movement. Every expression. Something about the girl made her uneasy. Then Victoria noticed something. Emily rolled up her sleeves while drying a plate. And there it was. The birthmark. Victoria's breath caught in her throat. The crescent shape. Exactly the same. Her mind exploded with memories she had buried for 15 years. Memories she prayed would never return. "No," she whispered under her breath. Emily looked up, confused. "Ma'am?" Victoria quickly regained control of herself. Her voice returned to its calm, elegant tone. "You're new here." "Yes, ma'am." "What's your name?" "Emily Carter." Victoria repeated the name slowly. Emily Carter. But inside her mind, another name echoed. Isabella. Victoria turned away quickly. "Finish your work and leave for the night." "Yes, ma'am." Emily continued washing dishes, but something felt wrong. Victoria Sterling had looked at her as if she had seen a ghost. Victoria's secret. Upstairs in her private bedroom, Victoria locked the door. Her hands were shaking. Impossible. It couldn't be. She walked quickly to her dresser and opened a hidden drawer. Inside was an old photograph. A little blonde girl smiling in the sun. Isabella Sterling. Victoria stared at the picture with wide eyes. 15 years ago, she had done something no one could ever know. Something unforgivable. Because the truth about Isabella's disappearance was darker than anyone imagined. Isabella had not been kidnapped by strangers. She had been taken by someone inside the family. Victoria herself. But it had never been part of the plan. She had only wanted to scare Alexander. To make him choose family over his business empire. But things had spiraled out of control. A woman she hired had taken Isabella away. And then vanished. Victoria had spent years searching quietly for the child. But the trail disappeared completely. Now, a maid with the same birthmark had walked into the mansion. Victoria's worst fear had come true. If Emily was really Isabella, the truth would destroy everything. Her marriage. Her reputation. Her entire life. And Alexander Sterling would never forgive her. Never. The DNA plan. The next morning, Robert Hayes began the plan. Emily arrived for work as usual. "Good morning," Robert greeted her politely. Emily smiled nervously. "Good morning, sir. I have a small request," he said casually. "Mr. Sterling would like tea again this morning." "Of course." Emily prepared the tray carefully. But Robert had already arranged something else. When Emily placed the teacup on Alexander's desk, she took a small sip from a glass of water nearby. A simple gesture. But it was exactly what Robert needed. Later, when Emily left the room, Robert quietly collected the glass. Inside it were the DNA traces they needed. He sealed it in a bag. Within hours, the sample was sent to a private laboratory. Now they had to wait. 48 hours. 48 hours that could change everything. The warning. But someone else had already guessed what was happening. Victoria Sterling. That evening, she approached Emily in the hallway. "Emily," she said. "Yes, ma'am?" Victoria studied her face carefully. "You should find another job." Emily blinked in surprise. "Ma'am? This house isn't the right place for you." Emily felt confused. I need this job." Victoria stepped closer. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "You don't understand the danger you're in." Emily's heart began to race. Danger? Victoria suddenly realized she had said too much. She quickly turned away. "Just take my advice." And then she walked away. Emily stood frozen in the hallway. None of this made sense. Why was the billionaire staring at her? Why was his wife warning her to leave? And why did every photograph of Isabella Sterling make her feel like she was looking at a memory she had forgotten? But the most terrifying answer was coming soon. Because in less than 2 days, the DNA results would arrive. And the truth hidden for 15 years would finally be revealed. The next 2 days felt endless. For Alexander Sterling, time moved slower than it had in 15 years. Every minute dragged like an hour. Every thought led back to the same terrifying possibility. What if Emily Carter really was Isabella? He had trained himself for years not to hope. Hope was dangerous. Hope had destroyed him before. But now it had returned. And it refused to leave. Waiting. Robert Hayes entered Alexander's office late that afternoon. "The lab called," he said. Alexander immediately stood up. "Do they have the results?" Robert nodded. "They're sending the final report now." Alexander's heart pounded. "Minutes?" he asked. "Probably." Neither man spoke after that. The silence inside the office was heavy. Outside the tall windows, the city continued its normal life, cars moving, people walking, businesses running. But inside that room, 2 men waited for an answer that could rewrite 15 years of history. Then Alexander's phone buzzed. An email. Robert stepped closer as Alexander slowly opened it. Attached was the laboratory report. Alexander stared at the screen. His hands trembled as he opened the file. For a moment, he couldn't breathe. Then he read the final line. Probability of biological relationship, 99.98%. Emily Carter was his daughter. The truth hits. Alexander sat down heavily in his chair. He stared at the screen again. And again. But the words didn't change. After 15 years. After endless searching. After giving up hope 1,000 times. His daughter had been working inside his own house. Robert broke the silence first. "She's Isabella," he said quietly. Alexander's voice cracked. "My daughter." His eyes filled with tears. He had not allowed himself to cry in years. "She's alive." For a moment, neither man spoke. The weight of the discovery was overwhelming. But then Alexander's expression changed. Joy slowly turned into something else. Anger. Cold, controlled anger. "Someone took her," he said. Robert nodded. "Yes." Alexander stood slowly. "And someone made sure we never found her." His voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "I want the truth. All of it." Meanwhile, Emily was in the library cleaning the shelves. The mansion felt stranger every day. She kept remembering Victoria Sterling's warning. "You don't understand the danger you're in." Danger from what? Or from who? As she dusted another shelf, she noticed an old photo album. Curious, she opened it. The first page showed baby pictures of Isabella Sterling. Emily flipped the page. More photos. Birthdays. Family trips. Then she froze. One picture showed Isabella at age 6. Standing beside Alexander Sterling. Her wrist clearly visible. The crescent-shaped birthmark. Emily slowly looked down at her own wrist. Her heart started beating faster. A strange feeling spread through her chest. Something deep inside her mind stirred. A memory. Blurry. Broken. She saw flashes. A large bedroom. A crying woman. A car driving through the night. Then darkness. Emily slammed the album shut. Her breathing was heavy now. "Why does this feel familiar?" she whispered. Victoria's desperation. Across the mansion, Victoria Sterling was pacing in her bedroom. She knew the DNA results would arrive soon. And if Alexander discovered the truth, everything would collapse. She grabbed her phone and dialed a number she had not called in 15 years. The line rang twice. Then a rough female voice answered. "You promised never to call again." Victoria's voice shook. "She's back." Silence on the other end. "What are you talking about?" "The girl," Victoria whispered. "She's here." Another long pause. "That's impossible. She's working in the house as a maid." The woman cursed quietly. "You said the child would never come back." "I thought she wouldn't." Victoria's breathing became shaky. "You need to fix this." "No," the woman replied coldly. "I did my job 15 years ago." "You abandoned her." "You paid me to take her away." "I did." Victoria felt panic rising. "If Alexander finds out." "Then that's your problem," the woman interrupted. The call ended. Victoria lowered the phone slowly. Her worst fear was becoming reality. The past was returning. And it was about to destroy her. Father and daughter. That evening, Alexander made a decision. He could not wait any longer. He needed to see her. Emily was about to leave for the day when Robert stopped her in the hallway. "Mr. Sterling would like to speak with you." Emily felt nervous again. "Did I do something wrong?" Robert gave a small smile. "No. Just come with me." They walked toward Alexander's office. Emily's heart beat faster with every step. She knocked gently on the door. "Come in," Alexander's voice said. Emily stepped inside. Alexander Sterling stood near the window, looking out at the city. For a moment, he couldn't turn around. Seeing her now felt overwhelming. Finally, he faced her. Emily noticed something strange. His eyes looked different. Not angry. Not distant. Almost emotional. "You wanted to see me, sir?" she asked. Alexander walked closer slowly. Every step felt unreal. 15 years of searching had led to this moment. "You grew up in foster care," he said softly. Emily looked surprised. "Yes." "Do you remember anything from before that?" She shook her head. "Very little." Alexander's voice trembled slightly. "Not even your parents?" Emily looked down. "No." Alexander took a deep breath. The words felt impossible to say. But the truth could not stay hidden anymore. "Emily," he said gently. "What if your real name isn't Emily Carter?" She looked confused. "What do you mean?" Alexander's eyes filled with emotion. "What if your name is Isabella Sterling?" Emily stared at him. The room went silent. For a moment, the world seemed to stop. Then she whispered the only word she could manage. "What?" The room felt suddenly smaller. Emily stood frozen in the middle of Alexander Sterling's office, staring at him as if he had just spoken a language she didn't understand. "Your name is Isabella Sterling." The words echoed in her mind. "No," Emily said quickly, shaking her head. "That's impossible." Alexander stepped closer, his voice gentle but firm. "We ran a DNA test." Emily's eyes widened. What?" "It confirms that you are my daughter." The air felt heavy. Emily's breathing became uneven. This is crazy," she whispered. "I grew up in foster homes. I've been Emily Carter my entire life." Alexander watched her carefully. "I know this is difficult," he said softly. "But sometimes the truth is hidden from us." Emily looked at the floor, trying to steady herself. "You're saying someone kidnapped me?" Alexander nodded slowly. "Yes." Her mind struggled to process the idea. Images flashed faintly in her thoughts again. A large house. A crying voice. A car driving through the dark. Her head suddenly hurt. I remember something," she whispered. Alexander leaned forward. "What do you remember?" Emily pressed her fingers to her temple. "It's blurry." "What is it?" "A woman arguing with someone." "Who?" "I don't know." Her breathing quickened. "And then, someone carrying me outside." Alexander's heart raced. "You were taken," he said quietly. Emily shook her head again, overwhelmed. "This doesn't make sense. Why would anyone kidnap me?" Alexander's expression hardened. "That's exactly what I intend to find out." The fear. Outside the office door, someone stood silently. Victoria Sterling. She had heard everything. Her hands trembled as she stepped back from the door. Alexander had told the girl. The truth was already beginning to surface. If Emily remembered everything, Victoria's secret would be exposed. And once Alexander learned the full truth, nothing would save her. She quickly turned and walked away down the hallway. Her mind raced with panic. She had only one choice left. The girl had to disappear again. The investigators' discovery. Meanwhile, Robert Hayes was in the security room studying old files. He had reopened the original kidnapping investigation from 15 years ago. Something about the case had always bothered him. Too many things didn't make sense. No forced entry. No ransom demands. And the security cameras shutting off for exactly 17 minutes. It felt too precise. Too controlled. As he examined the old staff records, one name caught his attention. Clara Vance. A temporary nanny hired shortly before Isabella disappeared. Robert frowned. He searched deeper into the file. Clara Vance had vanished shortly after the kidnapping. No arrest. No trace. No explanation. Robert's instincts sharpened. This woman was connected to everything. But there was one detail that made his stomach twist. Clara Vance had not been hired by Alexander. She had been hired by someone else in the house. Someone with authority. Robert slowly closed the file. There was only one person who could have approved the hiring. Victoria Sterling. The truth approaches. Back in the office, Emily was still struggling to process everything. Alexander handed her the DNA report. She read the final line with shaking hands. 99.98% match. Her vision blurred. So, you're really my father? Alexander's voice softened. Yes. Emily looked at him carefully. Something inside her heart shifted. A strange warmth. A feeling of familiarity she couldn't explain. You've been looking for me all these years? She asked quietly. Every single day. His voice cracked slightly. Emily felt tears forming in her eyes. Her entire life had been a question. Now she finally had an answer. But something still felt wrong. Who did this? She asked. Alexander's expression darkened again. I don't know yet. But at that exact moment, Robert Hayes burst into the office. Alexander. His tone was urgent. Alexander turned immediately. What is it? Robert held up the file. I found the woman who took Isabella. Emily looked up quickly. Who? Robert hesitated for a moment. Because what he was about to say would change everything. She was hired by someone inside this house. Alexander's eyes narrowed. Who hired her? Robert looked directly at him. Victoria Sterling. The room went completely silent. Emily felt her heart stop. Alexander stared at Robert in disbelief. You're saying, my wife arranged the kidnapping? Robert spoke carefully. The records show she approved the nanny's hiring 2 weeks before Isabella disappeared. Alexander's mind raced. No. But deep down, something dark began to connect. Victoria had been acting strangely for years. Avoiding discussions about Isabella. Refusing to reopen the investigation. And today, she had warned Emily to leave the house. The truth was becoming impossible to ignore. The final shock. Suddenly, the security alarm rang loudly through the mansion. Robert looked at the monitor screens. His face turned pale. Alexander. What? The front gate just opened. And? Robert zoomed the camera feed. A black car was speeding into the driveway. Emily felt a chill run down her spine. Who is that? Robert's voice dropped. I believe that's Clara Vance. The woman who kidnapped Isabella. And she had just returned to the Sterling mansion. After 15 years. The alarm echoed through the Sterling mansion. Red lights flashed along the hallway walls. Emily stood frozen beside Alexander's desk. "Who is Clara Vance?" she asked, her voice shaking. Robert Hayes looked at the security screen again. "The woman who took you." Alexander's hands slowly clenched into fists. 15 years of pain. 15 years of searching. And now the person responsible was driving straight toward his house. "Let her in," Alexander said coldly. Robert looked at him. "You're sure?" "Yes." Alexander's voice was calm now, but there was something dangerous behind it. "Tonight this ends." The return. A few minutes later, the front doors of the mansion opened. Heavy footsteps echoed across the marble floor. Emily watched as a woman entered the hall. She looked older, tired, and hardened by life. But her eyes were sharp. Clara Vance. She stopped when she saw Emily. Her face went pale. "You," she whispered. Emily felt her stomach twist. "You know me?" Clara slowly laughed, though there was no humor in it. "Of course I do." She looked at Alexander. "You found her faster than I expected." Alexander stepped forward. "You took my daughter." Clara raised her hand slightly. "Technically. I was hired to." The room fell silent. Emily's heart pounded. "Hired by who?" Alexander demanded. Clara glanced upstairs. "Your wife." Victoria's fall. At that moment, Victoria Sterling slowly walked down the staircase. Her elegant composure was gone. Her face was pale with fear. "Victoria," Alexander said quietly. "Tell me she's lying." Victoria stopped on the final step. Tears filled her eyes. "I never meant for it to happen like this." Emily looked between them, confused and frightened. "You kidnapped me?" she asked. Victoria shook her head quickly. "No. I only wanted to scare your father." Alexander's expression turned to ice. "Explain." Victoria's voice trembled. 15 years ago you cared more about your company than your family. That's not. You missed birthdays. You missed holidays. You missed everything." Her voice cracked. "I thought if Isabella disappeared for a few hours, you'd finally realize what mattered." Emily felt her chest tighten. "You planned it?" Victoria nodded slowly. "I hired Clara to take you somewhere safe." Clara crossed her arms. "That's not exactly how it went." Victoria looked down. "I only wanted a few hours. But then things went wrong." Clara spoke coldly. "When the police started searching everywhere, she panicked." Victoria whispered, "I couldn't tell the truth." "So she paid me to disappear with the girl," Clara finished. Emily felt the ground beneath her world crumble. "So you just abandoned me?" Clara shrugged slightly. "I left you at an orphanage across the state." Alexander's anger finally exploded. "You destroyed 15 years of my daughter's life." Victoria collapsed onto the staircase. "I tried to find her later, but she was gone." Emily stared at the woman who had once been her mother. All her life she had wondered why no one came looking for her. Now she knew. Her own family had caused it. The choice. Police sirens began approaching outside. Robert had already called them. Clara sighed. "Well, that's my cue." She raised her hands calmly. "I suppose prison was inevitable." Officers soon entered the mansion and placed Clara in handcuffs. Victoria didn't resist when they approached her either. Before they took her away, she looked at Emily. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I loved you." Emily didn't answer. She couldn't. The pain was too deep. Victoria was led away. The mansion became silent again. Father and daughter. Emily stood in the middle of the hall, feeling lost. Alexander slowly approached her. "I know this is overwhelming," he said gently. Emily wiped her tears. "You looked for me all these years?" "Yes." "Why didn't you give up?" Alexander's voice softened. "A father never stops looking for his child." Emily looked at him. For the first time, she saw something she had never had before. "Family. You're really my dad," she whispered. Alexander smiled through tears. "Yes." Emily hesitated for a moment. Then she stepped forward and hugged him. Alexander held her tightly. 15 years of grief finally began to fade. 1 year later. The Sterling mansion looked different. Laughter had returned. Emily, now officially Isabella Sterling again, had started college. But she kept something from her old life. She still volunteered with cleaning agencies and orphanages. Because she never forgot where she came from. One evening, she stood beside Alexander on the mansion balcony. The sunset painted the sky orange. "Do you regret finding me?" she asked. Alexander looked surprised. "Never." "Even after everything that happened?" He smiled gently. "Especially because of it." Emily looked out over the city. "My life changed because of the truth." Alexander nodded. "Sometimes the truth hurts. But sometimes." He placed a hand on her shoulder. "It brings us home." Emily smiled. After 15 years of being lost, she had finally found where she belonged.